Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Today, we have a new episode of Talking Topics, and we're going to be discussing the Kabbalistic death cult that seems to have pervaded our society in virtually all facets, from my understanding, the government, the economy, the culture, and everything in between. And I have invited a what I would consider a leading expert on this topic, Christopher John Bjerknes. Is it Bjerknes or Bjerknes? I want to make sure I'm
Bjerknes. Just
Bjerknes.
pretend that the J is a Y.
All right. Christopher John Bjerknes is here. He's dedicated multiple decades to studying this and has gone out of his way to understand these things so that he can translate them and communicate them to us effectively. You've done a lot of the heavy lifting and stuff here for us, man, and would love to dive in and just kind of get some of your insights on these things.
Great.
Really quick, I do want to ask you, how did you get started in all of this, like researching not only this topic but also like various other topics? What sort of made you say, this is what I want to do with my life and dedicate my time to and educate people?
Well, I grew up in a very erudite family of intellectuals. All of my siblings had IQs over 150. I had a tested IQ of 176. And we were often discussing politics. The Vietnam War was going on. It was a very turbulent time. And I was studying philosophy. One of my brothers was studying philosophy at University of Chicago. We had a set of the great books, and I knew from my studies of Greek philosophy that Christianity was a plagiarism of Greek philosophy and Greek fables. A lot is copied even from Aesop, a lot of verbatim stuff about the wolf in sheep's clothing, etc. So I was struck by that. So I knew that Christianity was always an illusion, and I could see how it was a trap and a trap to bring down the Roman Empire. I also discovered that Albert Einstein was a plagiarist. I didn't discover it, but I came across the fact that Albert Einstein was a career plagiarist and that there were superior theories to his, some of them proposed by my own ancestors. And so I delved into that, and I realized, I learned that Albert Einstein was a globalist and a Zionist, and he was hypocritical in that sense. On the one hand, he called for nationalism for Jewish people, but then relegated all non-Jewish people to globalism and submission to the nationalistic Jewish empire. And it clicked in my head that all of this is extremely messianic. And I realized that all of these people are pursuing the messianic prophecies of Judaism and to a lesser extent Christianity and Islam, which had been fabricated to play their role in fulfilling these same prophecies. And that since there is no God of Israel and since there is no Satan, they had to find people to play these roles if they were to fulfill these prophecies, which they took to be their plans. And I came across a book by Moses Hess, Rome and Jerusalem, where he said that the Jewish people would have to be its own Messiah and fulfill its own prophecies itself. And that was also a very Zionistic text. And I came across the Zionism of Mordecai Manuel Noah, who was an early American Zionist, a judge in the US in the early 1800s, and he started proposing Zionism as early as 1814, 1818. And I tied all that into the Rothschilds who were funding all this. I found all kinds of very early newspaper and magazine articles from the early 1800s where the Rothschilds were proposing a Zionistic movement. I discovered that Isaac Newton was a staunch Zionist. And I found literally hundreds of texts in early Protestant works proposing the restoration of the Jews. And I put all that together. And I realized together with others that the world wars were both perpetrated to fulfill the mission of Zionism. The First World War broke up all of the empires and the monarchy and substituted them with socialistic governments. And very importantly, it destroyed the Ottoman Empire to free up Palestine, but Jewish people didn't want to go to Palestine, so they had to be forced to Palestine at gunpoint. And that led into World War II, and Adolf Hitler was clearly a Bolshevik Zionist stooge who set up to give the Jews the incentive to go to Palestine and ultimately to remove all British interest in Palestine when the Zionists began their terroristic acts to chase out the British. And then Stalin got involved, and eventually Truman, in founding the nation of Israel. So the two world wars were to fulfill the quest to establish Israel, and they always believed that the wars of Gog and Magog, which manifested as the two world wars, would have an ultimate third world war. There's a book written by a rabbi called Redemption Unfolding that says exactly that. And the Lubavitch Rebbe's and other prominent members of Chabad Lubavitch were saying after World War I that there would be a second world war, and it would be worse and more devastating. And then there would be a third all-consuming world war. And they were saying this before the Second World War. They gave the exact dates that the Second World War would start. So this is very clearly all being orchestrated by the same people for the same purposes. And Christianity was one of the instruments and agencies by which they set about to fulfill all of these plans, which originally appeared in the Septuagint in the 270s BC in Alexandria, Egypt, in Greek. And they set up all kinds of things that we can get into with the behemoth and the Leviathan in the book of Job, which are manifesting themselves today, not by divine providence, but by deliberate action and deliberate planning.
Wow. Yeah, that's very, very succinct. I know it seems like a lot, but when you take into consideration, like, we're talking thousands of years of history, a very succinct explanation for how they've sort of over time sort of infiltrated and pervaded all of these various facets of society.
Not only the facets of society, but the facets of the human psyche, the consciousness, the continual zeitgeist of all the societies that have fell under their influence has been manipulated by them and controlled by them and implemented and instituted by them into the collective minds of people in order to cause this direction that was set up in their prophecies to lead people ultimately into what we're facing today, which is the extermination of humanity.
Absolutely, and I think the modern term that they like to use is social engineering, but I mean this thing goes back all the way to the beginning, in my opinion. So I absolutely agree with you.
It's social engineering, it's political engineering, it's cultural engineering, and very importantly, it is religious engineering. And they have duped people into believing that we are conceived in evil through the fall of Adam, and that we have to be redeemed, and that our redemption comes about through our destruction and our death, which supposedly brings us eternal life, and through the destruction and annihilation of the present world, which they refer to as Olam Hazeh, in order to give way to the world to come, Olam Haba. And the story of Genesis, that there are 6 days of creation, are interpreted by the Kabbalists to mean that those 6 days each represent 1,000 years, and that there is a 6,000-year period representing 6 ages of the zodiac, which culminates at the end of the age of Pisces, giving way to the age of Aquarius, which is the very dangerous period that we are at right now. So they believe that creation the creation of Yahweh, the God of Israel, now has to be destroyed so that the creation of the Jewish people, the world to come, has room to manifest itself so that they can actually create it and artificially create it so that they can become the masters of chaos, molding reality to conform to their view of what it ought to be.
Mm. Yeah, and it's especially alarming because I believe we just entered into the age of Aquarius less than a month ago. It was March 21st, I believe, was the date.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah,
That's news to me.
oh,
If that's true, that is tremendously significant.
yeah, I saw a couple different posts about it. Obviously, I think it's sort of open to some differing interpretations as far as like a specific date. But I saw tons of stuff about us like entering into the age of Aquarius on March 21st.
There should be astronomical observations which can confirm it.
Okay.
The appearance of certain stars at certain locations at certain times.
Okay. Well,
I'll have to look into that. That flew by me.
oh yeah, I mean it seems like especially this year with this administration and all of the news cycles and stuff that comes out, it a week passes by and it in a blink of an eye these days.
Yes, and also very significantly on the Freemasonic calendar and the calendar utilized by the Shabbatayans, the year 2000 was the year 6000. And then we had September 11th, 2001 to instigate all of this. So they are clearly timing it all based upon that calendar. And the Hebrew calendar is a little bit different, but they're not utilizing that. They're utilizing the Anno Lucas calendar of Freemasonry, which is simply our schedule of years plus 4,000 years,
I see.
an additional 2 ages to the age of Pisces.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to do some more research myself. I'm very like new to I guess the researching and investigation thing, so I'm always trying to lean on people that have been doing this for a while because you guys have done the hard work of trying to make sense of it all. So it helps me to better increase my understanding, I think. And so I've heard a few different takes as far as when exactly this started. In your opinion, where did all of this come from? Like, who were the people that created this ideology, this belief system?
Which belief system are you referring to? Kabbalah?
Yes. Sorry.
Kabbalah is an evolution of the oral traditions of Judaism found in the Talmud and the Midrash, and it is much more than that. It is an adoption of Middle Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophy together with the Gnosticism of early Christianity in what is called emanation theories. The idea that there is a highest God that is ineffable and incomprehensible, but cannot be divided since it is perfection. If you were to create something other than that God, it would be no longer God because God is perfect. And to separate from God is to become imperfect, to move away from goodness, beauty, and truth, and to move away from unity. And Plato and the earlier views of the Orphics had this idea that there would be a creator God so that the unity of the real God, the monad, the one, would not be broken. So the monad emanated a God, a creator God, to create the universe outside of itself so that it would not become imperfect. And Plato referred to that as the demiurge, the creator God. But it's drawn from the Orphic religion of the Greeks, where there was a god named Phanes Protogenes, Lightbringer, first begotten, who was reborn as Jesus Christ, who hatches from a cosmic egg and then emanates a tremendous amount of light, which goes into the darkness of primordial chaos and starts to bring beauty, goodness, truth, and order to chaos and creates the universe for God. And then in the universe, there are lesser gods who are created below the demiurge, but there's also a figure called the world soul. And the world soul puts the souls that emanate from God, from the one, into human beings and angels and animals and plants. So we see a hierarchy developing that's called the Great Chain of Being. And the Kabbalists very much adopted all of this, that there is the one, the Ein, there is the Ein Sof, the one, the Ein is essentially nothingness because it's so ineffable we can't find any way of conceiving of its being or its attributes. And then the Ein Sof we conceive of as limitlessness. And then the Or Ein Sof is the limitless light that is emanated in order to form creation. So the Greeks then had this demigod who becomes Adam Kadmon in Cabala, this demiurge, I'm sorry. And they also have the demiurge is androgynous and its female half breaks off to form the female world soul. Just as Adam was divided into Adam and Eve, it was initially an androgynous being, and then it emanated the world soul. The world soul creates, together with the demiurge, all of the universe and the sentient beings of the higher gods, the lower gods, which are called angels in Christianity and Judaism, and then human beings, and beneath human beings, animals, and then beneath animals, plants, and beneath plants, minerals, and beneath minerals, the nothingness of matter.
See.
And so when the world soul puts souls into plants and animals and human beings consume those plants and animals, it begins a process that reverses this emanation downward. The emanation downward is viewed as a catastrophe because it is separation from the monad. It is distance, and it moves progressively downwards towards the hell of nothingness, the evil of matter. And now I'm getting more into the Gnostic and the Kabbalistic conception of matter than the Greek. The Greeks viewed it more as a deprivation of goodness to get away from God. But in Judaism, it is viewed as an actual evil force, that there is an evil force of chaos, of matter, and it's not simply the deprivation of good, but it is the alternate aspect of God itself, and it is actually the highest aspect of God. They believe that tohu vavohu choshech, primordial chaos, formless emptiness, and darkness were the first emanation of God before the light. So they are the most ancient. The most ancient beings are the beings, the ancient ones, they're called, of chaos. And they are the most powerful, the most intelligent, and the most creative. And so in Kabbalah, they adopted all of this emanation from the Greeks that formed the universe and the ambition of Greek philosophy. And Plato said that these emanations travel down 7 planets to the earth, and the soul, since it is an emanation, travel down 7 planets to the earth. The goal of the philosopher, the goal of the Hasid in Judaism is to return back and to hop back up those 7 planets, which become the Sephirot of Cabala, to return to God, to return to the divine realm and reunite with God and have a mystical, ecstatic reunion with God. So the emanation is reversed and it becomes the return. And the return in Judaism is called teshuvah, and the return in Neoplatonic philosophy is the Greek word for return, epistrophe. So they are trying to return everything back to God. Now, in Judaism, this creator God, the demiurge, was revealed by the Gnostics to be an evil, cacodemonic God that they rejected. And the Old Testament recounts all the alleged stories of the Israelites rejecting Yahweh and seeking other gods, seeking the golden calf, seeking Baal, seeking Asherah, who is kind of like the world soul, the female aspect of God, and represents the dark side, the evil side, the left-hand side, which they view as good and which they align themselves with as good. And it represents the moon as opposed to the sun. And the moon is a parasite that steals light from the sun. So their ambition is to gather all the light, the goodness, the beauty, and the truth, and the might, which they refer to as Tiferes and Ois, and to gather that from the Gentiles, to deprive them of their own Tiferes and Ois, so that they wither and perish, to deprive them of their own gods, including these Greek gods, which are the foundation of all this, which are themselves a plagiarism and a syncretic adoption of the Egyptian gods. And they do this for a twofold purpose. One is so that the Gentiles lose their supernatural protection, and then they give them substitute gods like Jesus Christ and like Allah as a trap that leads them into dissolving into this nothingness at the bottom of the great chain of being. When you worship Jesus, they say in the Aleinu prayer that you are worshiping vanity and nothingness. You are worshiping Satan. So your soul continues to emanate, and people think that since emanation is like sunlight, it's a good thing, but it's not. It's greater and greater distance from God, and greater and greater proximity to evil, that by worshiping these gods, you are driven down the great chain of pyramid, the pyramid of the great chain of being. And also by consuming minerals instead of consuming plants and animals, you are driven down the great chain of being. And instead of thinking with the divine intellect and utilizing artificial intelligence, you are utilizing the creations of chaos, of matter, of minerals. So you are no longer having faith in God and following God's laws and God's understandings and the first intellect, as it was called by the Chaldeans and some of the Greeks. You are following Satan and chaos, and that is to draw you into the mineral realm and ultimately into the realm of chaos of matter, so that you become nothing. And they say that when that happens to Gentiles, they are nullified, they are annihilated. Now, the nullification of the Jewish soul is the opposite path. That is the path of taking all the goodness, the beauty, and the divine light that the Gentiles have voluntarily given up to the Jews by believing in these false gods, these devilish gods, and abandoning their own ancestral gods, which then were handed over to the Jews, that they can elevate their soul, and they are utilizing Gentiles as nourishment, just as Gentiles used to utilize the souls bestowed by the world soul on plants and animals to elevate their souls back to the ecstatic reunion with God. They are now capturing the souls of the Gentiles and utilizing that to ascend back up and undergo the teshuvah, the return, the epistrophe, back into the oneness of God, so that they lose their ego and they experience becoming one with God. Now, in Judaism, there were three different forces that were interacting behind all of this to bring about the evolution to culminating all of this at the end of the 6,000 years. And there is this force that God is the highest king and sovereign of the universe, and that God is the lawgiver and only spoke through Moses. But since the God of the Jews is such an evil force that is continually issuing curses and making demands which are irrational and calling for the extermination of human beings, there was also another movement in Judaism to establish an earthly king, a human king based on the model of the Pharaoh as a demigod. And that king was to be utilized to help the Jewish people overcome the Gentiles and fulfill their commandments from the sovereign king of the universe, the God of Israel, to exterminate other Gentiles. They believed that in order to do that, they would require a king to lead them in battle. Now, the God Yahweh warns them in the Old Testament that if they do that, that king will lead them into catastrophes and be a horrible tyrant. And the whole story is premised on the idea that they wanted to escape the tyranny of Pharaoh and escape the tyranny of slavery. So when they went into the desert, it got even worse for them than it was in Egypt. So they rebelled against God. And they said, look at this. We don't even have food and water, at least when we were slaves. In Egypt, we had food and water, and your tyranny, Yahweh, is even worse than that. So Yahweh got mad at them, demanded complete obedience. They then much later moved on with Saul and then David into their kingship period. And in that period, the kings did indeed become tyrannical and lead them into catastrophes. And Yahweh essentially laughs at them for doing that. Now, these two strains in Judaism of Yahweh as sovereign, then a Jewish man as king of the earthly world, having the same attributes of Yahweh, wanting to exterminate the Gentiles, consuming all property as his own, completely enslaving all his people as Yahweh enslaved his own people. There was a rebellion against that. So we initially had Eve rebelling against the Elohim, the gods, against Yahweh. So that was the first form of rebellion against kingship. And then when Moses presented himself as the lawgiver and the prophet, he was essentially becoming a king, even though he's not recognized as a king. And there was a rebellion against him by a man named Korah. Now, Korah is supposed to have the soul of Cain. Cain was the son of Eve through Satan. Satan was the parent of Cain, not Adam. And that rebellious soul of Adam, before even Eve rebelled against God, Satan rebelled against God and wanted a kingdom of his own. So this quest for kingdom has always been a firm part of Judaism. The other aspect of that kingdom is that you have to have the empire. And since they stole the god of Egypt, Seth, who was worshipped by Ramses II, they proclaimed that they were due to inherit Ramses II's empire from the Nile to the Euphrates. So they not only wanted a king, they wanted a kingdom. And they made a contract with Seth, Yahweh, the God of Israel, that if they were to kill off all the people in that region, from the Nile to the Euphrates, most especially the 7 nations of the land of Canaan, that promised land of milk and honey would become theirs. But if they did not, they would be exiled because they had rebelled against God. Now, what happened to Eve? And when she misled Adam, what happened to Adam and Eve? They were exiled out of paradise, out of the Garden of Eden. So the Jews had been continually exiled from the land of milk and honey, the promised land. The other part of this contract was that they were to maintain a house of the Lord, so that Yahweh would have a heavenly throne as sovereign of the universe from which to rule the earth which Yahweh had created. So another aspect of being exiled was that the house of Yahweh would be destroyed. So the first temple of Solomon was built with angels and demons, which was rebellious against God. It was an evil place. It contained places of worship for his foreign wives and their gods. So that had to be destroyed. And when that was destroyed, they were sent into the Babylonian exile. Then Cyrus, the messianic figure of Messiah, son of Joseph, restored them to Palestine and enabled them to build the second temple. In the second temple, they went back to Baal worship, worshiping Moloch and sacrificing their firstborn children, which was again rebellion. When they rebelled, just as Satan was kicked out of heaven, just as Eve was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, the Jews were once again kicked out of the Promised Land, and the house of the Lord was destroyed. So they were sent into the exile among the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire became the Amalekite Edomite west of America and Great Britain and Western continental Europe. And so now they believe that they have to destroy that empire now that they have been restored back to Palestine, and they have to set about killing everyone off so that once again, as happened to Satan, as happened to Eve, as happened to Solomon's empire, as happened to the second temple, they want to first build the third temple, and they want to exterminate all the Gentiles and fulfill that essential contract, that covenant, that commandment to destroy all the Gentiles. And they were always planning for this. And they planned for it very much so with Christianity, that Christianity would create a world empire and utilize the beauty and the might and the goodness of the Europeans, but they would be following the direction of the treacherous Messiah, son of Joseph, Jesus Christ, just as Cyrus was following the directions, being the Messiah, son of Joseph, of his generation, to restore the Jews to Palestine. So it fulfilled this quest to first send the Jews into the diaspora, which was established in the book of Deuteronomy in 270 AD, long before it happened, 270 BC, long before it happened in 70 AD, so that they could infiltrate all the governments of the world and subvert them from within and destroy all the pagan religions, because Yahweh is a jealous God, and ultimately to destroy all Gentile governments, because the king of the Jews has the same attributes of Yahweh. He is a jealous king, so he has to destroy all the other monarchies. And they went a long way to accomplishing that with the First World War. And then the Second World War took it even further and broke up not only the monarchies, but the Gentile empires, destroyed the British Empire, for example. And I think there was an Egyptian who said that after the Second World War or the First World War, all that was left was the king of diamonds, the king of spades, the king of clubs, and the king of hearts, because all the monarchies had been destroyed. So they have succeeded. They've been quite successful in this goal to establish a king. This king is to replace Yahweh. At the end of the 6 days of creation, they exterminate Yahweh by ceasing to believe in him, just as the Gentiles exterminated all their pagan gods by ceasing to believe in them. And then their king becomes God, just as Pharaoh was a demigod. Their king becomes God, and his will manifests the universe. They can now create sentient beings, and they seek to create 600,000 immortal androgynous Jews to replace humanity, just as humanity supposedly derived from one man, Adam, and then was cleansed of all its evil by the flood, and then was regenerated by one man, Noah, and then once again became evil, progressively evil again, supposedly because of the Gentiles. It is now incumbent to regenerate humanity from one man, the Messiah, son of David, King Messiah of the Jews, from his DNA. And his DNA will be manifested androgynously by taking his skin cells to generate eggs, or other forms of DNA to generate eggs, and then utilizing his seed to create a new breed. But again, in Judaism, there has always been a countercurrent of rebellion, just as Eve rebelled, just as Cain rebelled, just as Korah said that Moses was an evil tyrant and his brother Aaron, the priest, was ripping people off by stealing all the sacrificial meat and by taking tithings from the people. There was a rebellion against that. And there was a rebellion against the Roman Empire by the Zealots, headed by Judas of Galilee, who forms an image of what is supposed to be Jesus Christ. And he said that the Romans have no authority to be king because only the God of Israel is a sovereign, and he's sovereign over everything.
Mm.
Now, this idea that God is sovereign over everything in the minds of the rebels, when they say that they have fulfilled God's commandments, there's something called antinomianism, whereby they say that all the work of the Creator God has been fulfilled, and now it is time for the human being, him or herself, to become God and to usurp the authority of God. And that was the rebellion of Eve, that she was going to consume knowledge and then consume the tree of life and become God. And that is why she was cursed, and Adam was cursed, and they were exiled from the Garden of Eden, from the promised land of milk and honey. So that's the stage that we are also at, because at the end of the 6,000 years of creation in the new Garden of Eden of Israel, the tree of the forbidden fruit of the knowledge of good and evil has become ripened and can now be safely consumed and has become kosher. And it has given them the ability to exterminate all the rest of humanity and to create immortal, androgynous, quasi-human beings. So they believe that they are now God, because what does God do? God creates intelligent beings. God has power over chaos to alter the form of chaos and to give it the order of its will. So they believe they are now God. So the rebellion against the Creator God, Yahweh, is now complete. And they perceive the Torah, the written Torah, to be the map of creation for the 6 days of creation. But now it has been discarded in favor of the oral Torah, which was written by Jewish people and forms the map of the world to come. And that is the stage that we're at. And that is why for 30 years I have been going on the internet and warning people that they believe there is an urgent need, a dire necessity for them to fulfill that commandment to exterminate all the rest of humanity, so that they are not kicked out of heaven as Satan was, so that they are not kicked out of the Garden of Eden as Eve was, so that they do not enter into the Babylonian exile or the Roman exile or the Muslim exile, but instead eliminate all Gentiles so that there can be no exile, and so that the whole world becomes the Garden of Eden, and there is no place into which they can be exiled, because they have eliminated what they refer to as the Sitra Achra, the evil other side. So in that great chain of being, of hierarchy, that pyramid of being, they view themselves as the holiness, as the apex, the capstone of the pyramid, and they view the Gentiles as primordial chaos and evil matter and nothingness that has to be nullified into complete nothingness. And they want to ensure that the souls of Gentiles cannot be elevated back up to God. So what they are doing is destroying Gentile religion, destroying Gentile education, and destroying the Gentile diet in such a way that all Gentiles become completely materialistic, feel driven to emanate further away from God, so that they are nullified into nothingness, so that they lose their souls by not consuming the plants and animals that God created, but instead consuming GMO plants and animals, and ultimately consuming artificial food composed of matter and minerals. And another aspect of that that's kind of interesting is they believe that every strain, every species, every subspecies, every race, and every subrace has its own set of guardian angels. And the Bible specifically instructs that things breed with their own kind. So when they start to mix the races, they believe that each one of these beings has guardian angels that protect them, but they lose all of that supernatural protection the moment that they breed with some form different from what they are. So they believe that miscegenation, for example, uh, destroys all the guardian angels of the separate races and causes them to lose all their supernatural protection. So again, they emanate further back into chaos and become nothingness.
See, that's that's quite a lot to take in, like taking all of that into context and applying it to some of the things that I'm seeing today. You know, you have Trump and most of his followers are talking about the world to come. We have things like transhumanism and vaccines sort of being a front for this eugenics from all of these people.
I
And
think it's dysgenics. I don't think it's eugenics.
yeah, yeah. And so I've heard of like multiple different versions or like main propagators of the Kabbalah, at least in like the last 500 years or so. You have Isaac Luria with the Lurianic Kabbalah, Sabbatai Zevi, and you know Jacob Frank after him. And then in the 20th century, Gershom Scholem, who sort of popularized, I guess, like the academic study of Kabbalah. Would you consider these like, are these all the same Kabbalah, like the same belief systems? And if not, how do they differ?
Um, there are different levels of Kabbalah.
Hmm.
It used to be forbidden for anyone who was not Jewish to study Kabbalah, and for anyone under the age of 40 or 35 who did not first have a bellyful of Talmud to study the Kabbalah. And they maintained a very strong oral tradition of Kabbalah that was passed down by rabbis and their most trusted students. Now, Kabbalah became very popular among the aristocracy of Europe and among the very wealthy classes of Europe. That the Medicis were fascinated with Kabbalah, and they got a Kabbalistic pope put in the Vatican. There were Kabbalists named Rosenroth and others who went across Europe and began spreading it. It became very popular in England. And they tried to pitch it very often as being similar to Christianity. So it was a form of apologetics for Judaism to Christians, whereby they could ingratiate themselves to Christians and begin to enter into the Christian church and then Judaize it. Jacob Frank was very much a Judaizer of Christianity, and he exposed what the Talmud said, but he was very much into Kabbalah. The Kabbalists became very popular because they were sort of wizards and magicians and con artists. Baal Shem Tov, who started the Hasidic movement, is a good example of how they would con people, and they would use magic tricks and offer potions, and it was very intermixed with the alchemists. And it was also, the alchemists were trying to create homunculi and all other kinds of things. And they were very often very brilliant people who advanced the knowledge of the physical world a great deal. So they were taken very seriously, and they were very important people to the upper classes. And then when the Renaissance came about and when Protestantism came about, the Catholic Church started to lose kind of its authority, and the doctrines of Catholicism started to lose their authority, and people were looking back into what the ancients had said. and they found Kabbalah very appealing because they believed that Kabbalah would give them magical powers, teach them how to actually get to heaven without dying, enable them to become wealthy, to cast love potions, to chase out demons. We got to remember how superstitious people in this period were. If you've followed Shakespeare's plays, even in the Elizabethan era, people were extremely superstitious. So they believed that there were spirits and angels and demons flying all about, as Kabbalah says. Kabbalah has different strains. It also has a very strong evolution. There were Christians who became involved in the evolution of Kabbalah. Pico della Mirandola is a prominent one. Johann Reichlen is another one. And they started to set up apologetics for Kabbalah. But the period that you're talking about of Kabbalah, one of the early Kabbalists, Abraham Abulaffa, was setting up the idea that Kabbalah became very synchronized with what is now known as Zionism, this idea of the restoration of the Jews. And when it started to get involved in that, a lot of money started to get put behind it. And there were various figures like Abraham Abulaffa, who asserted that he was Messiah, son of Joseph. He put a curse on the Pope. He said that Messiah, son of David, was going to come around. And then there was the very important year of 5,666, which on our calendar was the year 1666. And that's the year when Shabbatai Tzvi proclaimed that he would be the Messiah and that the Jews would be restored to Palestine. And that's why he became so tremendously significant, because that is the year that the Zohar said that the Messiah would appear. Isaac Luria was very significant in Kabbalah because he established this mythology of tikkun olam, of rectifying the world, and the idea of the shattering of the vessels of the Sephirot in the great catastrophe, in the creation of the world. In this emanation theory of the Greeks, Isaac Luria took on that emanation theory of Neoplatonism and of Gnosticism, and said that there was initially a great light emanated from the One. The Holy One is what the Jews call him, and that it had to be contained within vessels, and that these vessels are composed of primordial chaos, and that there were 10 of these vessels initially, and they were immature, and they had a very hard time containing this light, and the light wanted to restore itself back to God. It wanted to return just as we want to return to our source. So initially there was this spasmodic emanation of light, return of light, emanation of light. And when it hit the lower 7 vessels, Sephirot, they're called, these vessels were immature and shattered. And when they shattered, these were husks, these were shells, kelipat. The Bible talks about potter's clay and the shattering of the potter's clay, that these husks surrounded the holy sparks and concealed them, but they also preserved and protected them. So Lurianic Kabbalah said that since all these holy sparks are in these glowing shells, the Kelipa Noga, they have to be released. And the way that they are released is by following the commandments and by studying the Torah. So Jews believed that they had a strong mission to study Torah and to follow the commandments. Now, 3 of the 613 mitzvot that Maimonides wrote down as the commandments to the Jews call for the extermination of the Gentiles. So the rectification of the world and the release of the holy sparks from this evil of material matter of the Gentile world of the other side, the Sitra Achra, they have to be separated. Just as in Genesis, it says the light was separated from the darkness, and Leviticus says that the Israelites are separated from the Gentiles. The holy sparks have to be freed and released from the kelipat, from the shattered shards of the vessels that broke in the initial catastrophe, which is equated to the catastrophe of the fall of Adam. And that when that happens, the Jewish soul is freed up and becomes elevated and starts to return. It engages in teshuvah, return, epistrophe, and it is no longer emanating down towards matter. And one of the husks that they are separating from and discarding are Gentile human beings. So Gentile human beings are those shattered vessels that are being brought down into the material world to be dissolved and nullified into nothingness. And Isaac Luria said that he was Messiah, son of Joseph, whose role is to exterminate the Gentiles so that Messiah, son of David, can take over, just as Jesus was exterminated, so that Barabbas could take over and be king of the Jews. Another thing that Luria built upon was this idea that the Jews have long had, that they also got from Plato and from all kinds of Pythagoras and other philosophers of the Greeks. And also the idea of reincarnation is inherent in many religions. He built up on the idea of reincarnations of the dual seed line. Very importantly, that there was the seed line of Cain, who had the blood of Samael, of Satan, infused into him through Eve. And then there was the seed line of holiness of Abel and Seth. And that there were these brothers, Cain and Abel. Now, Abel still had a little bit of the residue of the seed of Samael, so he had to be killed. So Cain fulfilled a useful purpose. And they always say that evil fulfills a useful purpose and is even greater than good. Mm. So then when Seth was born, most of that remnant had been taken away, and Seth was the seed line of holiness. And that seed line of holiness passed down to Jacob. So that became the Jewish people, the Israelites, and then the Jewish people. The seed line of Cain became the seed line of Esau, the seed line of Korah, the seed line of the serpent. And its head has to be crushed. And this is the idea that Gentiles have to be exterminated. And Luria said that all the souls of the Gentiles derive from Cain. And he said that the soul of Korah and the soul of Esau and the soul of Jesus Christ are the soul of Cain, are the rebellious against God soul of Satan. So that the only way to rectify the world, the only way to engage in tikkun olam, is to eliminate that seed line, to eliminate Gentiles. So the primary focus of all the Kabbalists, it had been that before, but when Lurianic Kabbalah, it gave him a sound structure from which to comprehend this Jewish mission to create a Jewish utopia by exterminating everyone else. It really firmed it up and made it appealing and understandable and gave them a pretext for justifying it and helped them to understand why it was so necessary for them to be segregated and to endure the ghetto system and to perpetually view themselves as different from everyone else. It solidified that whole philosophical perspective and set them on course to being determined that by 1666, they were going to start to eliminate the Gentiles and they were going to establish their king. Now, it was also stated in all this Kabbalistic lore that the year 1840 would also be a very significant year when the gates of wisdom and the fountains of wisdom would open up and that Kabbalah could start to be taught more generally and could start to manifest itself in the world. And that was the same time that Disraeli started to talk about the idea that there were going to be massive revolutions in Europe that were coming up in the year 1848. And we had the Communist Manifesto being manufactured right around that time.
Yep.
And it was manufactured with the support of that man, Moses Hess, who was an arch Zionist. And we had all kinds of money pouring into the Rothschild family, and the Rothschilds were seen as the king of the Jews. And so they were building up to this year. The year 1914 was supposed to be very significant to them as well, and the year 2000. They were building up to all of this. And then we had other schools of Kabbalah, Cardoza, and a man named Vali. And Vali was very good at exposing the real nature of Christianity and the fact that Jesus Christ is Satan, and that consuming the Eucharist is turning Jesus Christ into feces and urine into the human body, and that the Eucharist cup is actually a toilet bowl and
wow.
a prophecy that when you consume the Eucharist, you are flushing Jesus down the toilet where he becomes feces and becomes urine that exits the body. And this fits in with Toledat Yeshu and with the Talmudic passages that say that Jesus is boiling in feces and semen as his punishment for speaking up against the scribes and Pharisees, the rabbis of his day. And so the Kabbalah is to give the metaphysical structure to creation that was completely lacking from the Old Testament. The Old Testament is primarily a series of curses and laws and a fabricated history. And in that sense, the Jewish religion lagged behind the Greeks and the Romans and the East Indians, very, very far behind all of them, and was a very primitive, very stupid religion that had no metaphysical meaning to it and no spiritual meaning. All the metaphysics and spiritualness of it was simply obeying the commandments of this cacodemon Yahweh. And so one of the things that Kabbalah did was to steal all of that from the Gnostics and primarily from the Neoplatonists to create some kind of higher philosophy than what the very mundane and primitive Old Testament creates. So it was trying to fill in all those gaps. And it was also set up to help them in their minds steal all the spiritual energy, all the beauty and might, and all the intelligence of the Gentiles and incorporate it into Judaism, which had until that point lacked all of that.
I see. That's that I mean, that makes total sense to me as far as the the times lining up with different events occurring throughout the world and stuff. And so I know that the Chabad Lubavitch are very heavily influenced with the Kabbalistic idealism and the ideologies, the teachings. In your opinion, are they the only group? Are they just the main group that are sort of perpetuating this belief system? And if not, do you know of who the other major groups and factions are? Because I see Chabad Lubavitch in the ear of Putin, Zelensky, Trump, basically all the major world leaders, it seems.
Chabad Lubavitch is in control of Trump through his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his daughter, Ivanka, who are Chabadniks. Chabad is very powerful in New York, which has millions of Jewish people in it. And the reason that Chabad is so very powerful is because they believe that the seventh so-called Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, was the Messiah and inherited the soul of Shabbatai Tzvi. they don't reveal the fact that they are Shabbataians, but I'm certain that that's what's taking place. And the Chabad Lubavitch movement is a Hasidic movement, which was started by Baal Shem Tov. There was a figure, Shnoyer Salman of Liadi, who was the first Rebbe of Chabad. Again, Chabad is a subset of Hasidism. And they were never all that powerful, but they always maintained the idea that they would have 7 Rebbes. And after the seventh Rebbe, the Messiah, son of David, would appear. The Jews would be restored to Palestine, and they would build a temple. Now, Putin is aligned with Chabad. He was raised essentially by Chabadniks. There was a Hasidic family in his apartment building who essentially raised him and groomed him. And he got rid of a few of the Jewish oligarchs who put him into power, Berezovsky, Khodorkovsky, and a man named Guzinski. Guzinski was the head of the World Jewish Congress and the chief rabbi of Russia. So Putin kicked him out of power and put in Berel Lazar, who is Chabad, into power and made Berel Lazar the chief rabbi of Russia. So it's a myth that Putin kicked out all of the oligarchs. He simply consolidated their power behind Roman Abramovich and his clique, because they had the most power in the world because they were part of this apocalyptic messianic cult, which is also closely aligned with the Likud party in Israel, which is led by Benjamin Netanyahu, who is also a Chabadnik who met with the Rebbe and whom the Rebbe prophesied would be the last prime minister of Israel, and that the throne would then be handed over to King Messiah, Messiah, son of David. In terms of Cabala in the broader Jewish community, all Orthodox Jews are Kabbalists. There was, at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, there was a slight rebellion against Cabala by people like Heinrich Gretz, who wrote a history of the Jews and said that Cabala had come out of this movement of Spinoza and Shabbatai Tzvi, and that it was a rejection of the written Torah and a rejection of Moses and a criticism of Moses and the law. And so there was a little pushback against Cabala at that time, especially among atheistic Jews and some Reformed Jews. But Cabala came back strong, as you said, because of Gershom Scholem, became popularized. We had Madonna pushing it. It became a kind of cult and trendy to say that you were studying Cabala. It was one of the ways to presume to adopt an intellectual aura and a spiritual aura, and to feel somewhat superior to others, the way that many Marxists or libertarians do. And it has its own, it's like Freemasonry, in that it has its own gestures and its own jargon, and it is very secretive. And that also became a way for rabbis to scam people by having them give them all kinds of money to learn the next step of Kabbalah, to engage in a little bit more of epistrophe and rise back towards God. So it became kind of a hustle. But it is standard Judaism. And the more and more that I study it, I think that it does have roots going all the way back to the Septuagint of 270 BC and the hidden meanings of all these obscure monsters and demons and gods that are cryptically referred to in the Old Testament. I do think there's some validity to the idea that some of these Kabbalistic ideas go all the way back and were always understood by the rabbis and transmitted orally as the real decoding of what this overall overarching plan is. Now, when I was talking before about this rebellion against God, A lot of these ideas of Spinoza and Shabbatai Tzvi actually originated from England and the time of the English Revolution, when there were workers' movements, we'd call them communists today, who were rebelling against the monarchy and against the throne. And one of these movements was the Brethren of the Free Spirit, that evolved into the diggers, the levelers, and the ranters. And they adopted this antinomian idea of Christianity, that Jesus had fulfilled the law of Moses and that the law of Moses no longer applied, and that no king had the right to be sovereign if God was sovereign. And if the laws of God had been fulfilled, then God had no right to be sovereign over man. So man was to become self-sovereign as an individual, and not only that, but to become God, because knowledge had ripened and mankind had attained a point where the morals of man exceeded the morals of God, and rejected the tyranny of God, and rejected the divine right of kings and the tyranny of earthly kings. And they became the evolution of the Gnostic communism of Carpocrates and his son Epiphanes, this idea of communal living, of having no property, of women being common property, of getting rid of marriage, and making men their own kings, but not only their own kings, but gods themselves. And this is where this idea solidifies of this rebellion against God, this rebellion against an earthly king asserting that he is God, to a person, him or herself, saying, I am sovereign over myself and I am a God. I can manifest my will to affect primordial chaos and to shape it, to adhere to my will. I can create my own children. If I'm an alchemist, I can create homunculi. And now they have artificial means of generating human beings from DNA. So this movement was looked upon very highly by Spinoza. And Spinoza rejected Moses as a negative, tyrannical figure who was misrepresenting himself as the voice of God in order to con human beings, that human beings are a part of God because the universe is pantheistic, and therefore we are God, and our thoughts are what create everything. So we are not only gods, we are creator gods. And Shabbatai Tzvi picked up on Spinoza and picked up on what was going on in England. So this was the 1640s. And then we have Nathan of Gaza, and we have Shabbatai Tzvi in the 1660s, grabbing hold, grasping all of this, and asserting that Nathan of Gaza is Messiah, son of Joseph, to exterminate the Gentiles. And Shabbatai Tzvi is King Messiah, Messiah, son of David. And all of these prophecies have been fulfilled. He is the bride of the Torah. He is the bride of God, and he will make all this happen. And so that too was a rebellion against God. But Shabbatai Tzvi was clinging on to that to make himself God and to make himself king over everything. But then they latched on to all these ideas that came out of the English Revolution in Marx and in communism to say that now the proletariat, the stupid masses, are God. And they united that to this idea of the rectification of the world in terms of exterminating the bourgeoisie, the intelligent class, the successful class, the economically powerful class, in order to fulfill ultimately all the Jewish prophecies of exterminating the Gentiles, because they realize, like it says, I think in Obadiah, that they have to exterminate the wise men out of Mount Edom, out of Mount Seir, so that the Gentile peoples will fail. So they utilized all this mythology that Gentiles had created in the English Revolution of, hey, we have to unite, we have to live communally, and we have to get rid of all these tyrannical, sovereign monarchs, including God itself, and get rid of all the kings so that we can each individually be God and king. And then Marx mutated all that into the idea that the proletariat would become the sovereign and the king and the god. But he knew that that was a subversive means of getting the Gentiles to self-sabotage and essentially exterminate themselves. And it was also in his day a means of getting rid of all the remaining kings and monarchies that essentially happened in the First World War. And there was a strong Marxist impetus behind the First World War, especially in Germany. I don't want to digress too far, but that is how we got where we're at today. Even those movements which posture and presume to be movements which are rebellious movements that are rebelling against God and rebelling against governmental authority, it's all a ruse, it's all a deception to create the most tyrannical and genocidal monarchy of them all, the kingship of Messiah, son of David.
See, yeah, I've noticed the cycle of subversions and things that I mean, even the going back to like the French Revolution, even just 200 years ago, but it seems like throughout, especially modern history, that we just keep repeating these same cycles of, something will start to fester and cause people to want to overthrow the current whatever's in power, and then from that comes something almost worse.
That's the process. They rebel against the tyranny of the monarch or against the tyranny of the state. It would be a more modern version of it. And then they throw everything into chaos,
Yeah.
deliberately so. Just like Kerensky threw everything into chaos after the March Revolution in 1917, so that the people then clamor for an authority figure to restore order. And again, the English Revolution is the perfect example of that. When they beheaded Charles I, it all went into chaos. And Parliament was chaotic and was leading the nation into disaster, just as the ancient Jews wanted a king to rally behind so they could go to war with the Gentiles. The English faced foreign threats. And there was a constant struggle between the Anglicans, the Puritans, the Protestant English, and the Catholic English, and Catholic monarchs who were aligned with Catholic France and its Catholic monarchy. So England was becoming weakened, and the lords and dukes were in jeopardy, and there was infighting, and there was wars going on. And then we had the Puritans under Cromwell, who was aligned with Manasseh ben Israel and the Dutch Jews, who helped to fund him and who provided him with the pretext of welcoming Jews back into England after they had been kicked out by Edward I for usury, on the pretext that Jesus could only return when Jews had gone into diaspora to the ends of the earth and therefore had to go into England. Cromwell took over the parliament, and it became so chaotic that Cromwell said, well, we now have to restore our order out of chaos, and he declared himself to be the dictator. And the same thing happened in the French Revolution, and the same thing happened in the Russian Revolution. And Kerensky, the Freemason, whose father was a Freemason and who taught the Freemason Vladimir Lenin in school, gave over the revolution to the Bolsheviks.
Mm-hmm.
So that they could restore order out of all the chaos that Kerensky's government had introduced during the First World War. And the Germans were very much involved in putting the Bolsheviks in power. Ludendorff helped to put both Lenin and Adolf Hitler into power. President Wilson helped Trotsky go from New York with a vast contingent of Jews to Russia to take over the revolution from Kerensky. And it was all obviously orchestrated to fit that model that you described, that I've been describing for 30 years, where you have an authoritarian, tyrannical government subjecting the people in a feudal state. They rebel against it. They rebel against the monarchy. Then you have a populist leader put into power who throws everything into chaos so that the people themselves clamor for the restoration of a dictatorship, but an even worse dictatorship than the monarchy was. Cromwell was not a monarchist, he was a dictator. And the monarch is viewed as the father of the nation, but the dictator is viewed as the tyrant of the nation, the worst form of tyrant. Doesn't have to follow God's laws, doesn't have to have any allegiance to the people. He is simply to direct them at the whims of his own will. And you can see that in America. Supposedly Biden threw the world into chaos, and then the dictator Trump emerges to restore order, but creates even worse chaos, just as the Bolsheviks did with their faked fights against the White Russians, and that led to all that massive bloodshed that took 30 million lives in Eastern Europe from 1917 to 1923. And
Jeez.
the same thing happened in Weimar Germany. You had Germany under the monarchy. At the end of the war, the monarchies were blamed for the war because Kaiser Wilhelm II was a close relative of George V of England and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. So it was seen as an interfamily monarchical war that gave way to the Weimar Socialist Republic, which sent Germany into chaos under pressure from the punitive Versailles Treaty. And that opened the door for Adolf Hitler to become the absolute dictator on the pretext of restoring order. And the first thing he did was Ermächtigungsgesetz and Gleichschaltung, where he said that only the Nazi Party laws could be followed and that he was the ultimate authority. And they stole that also from Lenin and his democratic centralism. And then the Rothschilds are trying to implement that in America with a new political party that they clothe in purple, combining the blue of the Democrats and the red of the Republicans into purple. And I think they call it no labels or something like that.
Mm.
But I've been pitching that idea for 30 years, that that's the cyclical process that they undergo. Another thing that they do that is very much along the model of Christianity is to create a self-hatred in people and to make them rebel against their own government and feel that it's unworthy and that they are a bad and evil nation, in the same way that Christianity makes Christians the scapegoats for Jewish sins. It saddles them with the burden of believing that they are responsible for the original sin of Adam and that they are conceived in sex and in evil and are therefore inherently evil, and that the universe has to be cleansed of their physical body, the corpse of flesh, so that their spirit can return to God.
Mm.
And that that's the only way to redeem them from this evil. And Jesus becomes this foreign savior figure of the enemy that comes in to kill you off. And they very often, especially the communists, try to create a popular climate where the foreign savior is worshipped in the form of Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping, who is going to save the West by exterminating us and completely annihilating us, and that we are deserving of it because we are decadent and degenerate and have adopted evil morality, and therefore we are deserving of this fate, and that it will be good for the world and redemptive of the world and cleansing of the world for all of us to be killed off, as happened in the flood.
Yeah, it's especially when you put it into context and you can start to see those patterns line up. I'm right there with you on the I believe that Biden was sort of this manufactured chaos so that people would clamor for Trump and sort of manufacture that consent from people to bring him back into power and restore that order. And especially with the Trump administration now, I'm starting to see huge pushes for like the technocratic state and things like transhumanism, through vaccines and different human augmentation ideas that they've had, and they seem to be very heavily entwined with a lot of the belief systems and stuff. I've read some things in stemming from the Tanya, specifically with like transhumanistic practices. And from in your opinion, do you think that the Kabbalah and different sections of the Kabbalah were sort of the inspiration for these movements, the like technocratic transhumanist agenda?
Absolutely. And for those who don't know, the Tanya is a book of instructions that was written by the first Rebbe of Chabad Lubavitch, Snoyer Zalman of Liadi. And it says that Gentile souls derive from the three satanic spheres of cloud, wind, and fire, and that Gentiles are inherently evil and have to be exterminated. So, yes, all of these processes, which are producing this destruction of our DNA at the most fundamental level. I mean, you could see Netanyahu going to artificial meat plants and being involved in all that. And all of this transhumanism is to steal the soul of the Gentile and to replace the Gentile intellect with a robotic, artificially centralized um, system of thought that is created by Satan through chaos, through the material world, generated by matter and not generated by God. This is the process of the nullification of the Gentiles. And Chabad Lubavitch has always been very strong in both pushing the Noahide laws on Gentiles and leading Gentiles into nullification. They repeat a phrase that about the extermination of the first of the nations, the first of the nations to rebel against the Jews, Amalek, who exposed the vulnerability of the Jewish people to attack and counterattack. It has always been a central theme of the Tanya and of the Chabad Lubavitch movement that it is absolutely necessary to cleanse the world of the wicked, to get rid of Esau's people, of the Amalekites, of the Gentiles. And all of these agendas, you can see how they do it. People are becoming increasingly infertile. People are becoming increasingly stupid. Their attention spans are diminishing to a few seconds. They are incapable, absolutely incapable of independent thought or analysis. Instead, they are always turning to paid influencers to mold their opinions and provide them with their opinions. And these are always subversive and divisive and generating disorder and weakening most especially America and the West, and weakening America's historic foundational roots in human freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of association, and freedom of religion. So it's very obviously attacks that are targeted. And to address what you've been saying consistently, yes, it is rooted in Kabbalah, strongly rooted in Kabbalah. And we have had historically many figures who have been rooted in Kabbalah. For example, Isaac Newton
Mm-hmm.
and his whole mythology of physics, which morphed into the theory of relativity and this numerology of viewing physics without an ether. All of that was engineered and guided by Kabbalists. And Isaac Newton was saying that Christians have to be exterminated and the Jewish people have to be restored to Israel. So he was very much against European peoples and for the Jewish people, and to fulfill all of these prophecies. He lent all of his authority and all of his engineering genius to advancing that cause of ultimately destroying Europeans and forwarding the agenda of the Kabbalists.
Yeah, and you see people like, especially in the 20th century, the Rockefellers and their sort of takeover of the medical industry and pushing those same things.
And also the education system.
Yeah, Yeah,
That
absolutely.
was a huge thing in the United States to align with socialism, was the idea of the working class hero and glorifying the working class hero and engineering education so that only the wealthy and the elites could get a collegiate education and go to university and gain doctoral education. And Harvard University, there were articles that I have in my books from the very early 1900s, 1905 or so, where they were talking about the idea that Jews who had come over from the Pale of Settlement after the Tsar, I think it was Alexander III, was assassinated in the 1880s, they opened up, because of the supposed pogroms, American immigration to Jews from Eastern Europe. And they were taking over. They were taking over Boston. They were taking over Boston College. They were taking over Harvard. And they would form cliques, and their faculties would engage in discrimination against non-Jews, and eventually they took over the faculties. And all of this was becoming very apparent even in 1905, and they argued against it because they said that the whole structure of American society was being re-engineered, not to the benefit of the American people, but to the benefit of Jewish people. And there is an old Jewish maxim which says, is it good for the Jews? Meaning, whenever they are confronted with a decision that affects Jews and non-Jews, they are always and only to do what is good for the Jews. And Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg specifically said that she followed that maxim in all of her decision making on the Supreme Court, that the first question that she would ask is it good for the Jews? And she would engineer her decision to ensure that whatever decision she advocated was good for the Jews.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one that I always like to bring up is the New School for Social Research. It was often called like the University in Exile because they were providing that like academic safe harbor for philosophers and educators that were being exiled from their countries. And you had people like John Dewey, who is often coined as like the father of education of the 21st century, for his propagation of the Dewey learning system. And that had people like Alvin Saunders Johnson, who was being employed by Rockefeller, and this sort of this meeting of the minds thing. Now, uh, do you honestly think that all of these cult members, like, do you think they truly do deep down believe that these things are real, like this mysticism and this prophecy, or do you see as them maybe using it as a cover to just be awful people? What, in your opinion?
Um, I think that they are superstitious
Hmm.
and want to hedge their bets. So they pretend to believe it.
Hmm.
And that was always the nature of the Jewish people and the fictitious Israelites. And Yahweh himself accused them of it and said that you only pretend to love me so that I don't destroy you. So he is a cacodemon. They worship him so that he does them no harm and so that he helps them to harm their enemies. And that was a common practice in the ancient world. The ancient Romans, for example, would sacrifice 3 white sheep to the god Jove, who was the good god, so that Jove would help them defeat their enemies and not allow their enemies to harm them. But they would also hedge their bets and sacrifice 3 black sheep to Vejovis, who was the cacodemon, so that he would do them no harm and instead would help them to harm their enemies who had not offered him food and sacrifice. The Greeks had something similar with Phanes Protogenes, the good god, and then Arminius, the cacodemonic god. And the statues of them look very similar, but one is lion-headed and one is human-headed. So I think there's a little bit of that going on, that they are tremendously superstitious and they want to keep their real thoughts and their real actions hidden from Yahweh. So they pretend to be pious until they have achieved all that they achieve, and then will forget about Yahweh and won't utilize his force anymore. I think it's a very social thing for them that enables them to engage in their network structures. And their piety encourages them to be evil people, to engage in parasitism, to harm others, to deceive others. The whole religion is built on Jacob's deception of Esau, first by trying to grab his heel and pull him back in the womb so that Jacob would be the firstborn, then getting him to trade his birthright and blessings for a bowl of porridge when he was famished, in the same way that Joseph got the Egyptians to enslave themselves to get back a little bit of the food that they themselves had grown. And so it's all about trickery and deception. And since they are so tricky and deceptive, I think a lot of their dress and garb and prayer and sacraments and the whole aura that they generate of being religious is a farce and a fake, and that they are at heart Shabbatai and Spinozan pantheists. And they utilize this as a way of maintaining the tribe, because another aspect of Judaism is that it prevents assimilation. It strongly discourages intermarriage, and so they cling to it for that as well. But the laws command them to engage in usury against non-Jews, but not against themselves, to love each other as brothers, but to hate all of humanity, just as God loved Jacob, but hated Esau. So that they get all kinds of benefits out of it, and it preserved them as a nation in exile for 2,000 years. And a huge part of that is a visceral, really deep-rooted hatred of the Goyim. And that is such a strong thing that they sense that Yahweh is behind that, and they admire that, and that's very much what keeps them united in this exile. And the fact that Yahweh is a God of vengeance, that gives them purpose, that they are waiting for King Messiah to come. And the reason that they don't rebel against King Messiah the way that Korah had rebelled against Moses and Aaron is because King Messiah is pledged to exterminate the Gentiles. And they very much look forward to that, and they're very much behind it. But they have to keep all of that secret.
Yeah.
And they also say in Sanhedrin, the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin, folio 59, that any Gentile who studies their works and learns about all of this has to be killed. And that it also says in Ketubot, folio 111a, that they have to keep their secret. And their secret is that their ultimate goal, the goal of King Messiah, is to exterminate the Gentiles utterly and completely. So the religion, as I was saying about the Old Testament, it is more a practical manual. It's very mundane. It is not metaphysical. It is not spiritual. It has practical political aims. And that is why this religion, people misunderstand it. They think that when they see rabbis in their black outfits and with their hats, that these are very pious people. And they believe that that piety means that these people feel they are compelled to be honest with you and to do you no harm and to treat you well and be good, in the same image that they view a Catholic priest or a reverend. But just as with a Catholic priest or a reverend, it's all a farce, but it's an even worse farce for rabbis, because rabbis are not priests. Rabbis are teachers. They don't have to be holy like priests. And secondly, because holiness to a Jew is obeying the commandments of God, which command the Jews to lie to Gentiles, command the Jews to rip off Gentiles with usury, command the Jews to exterminate the Gentiles, to cheat them in business whenever it cannot come back against the Jews, if a Gentile falls in a well, to not bring them back up out of the well, to give Gentiles bad advice that leads them into death and disaster. Their piety compels them to harm you. So all of these people who say, look at these religious people, they have to be good to me because they're God-fearing and they fear that they'll lose their souls if they harm me. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
They fear they will lose their souls if they treat you well, if they treat you as a brother, if they consider you to be a fellow human being. They are condemned to Gehenna, to hell. So it is another one of the things that I have constantly been trying to raise awareness of for 30 years is don't look upon these ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jews or any rabbi or anyone wearing a yarmulke and think that because they are pious people, if they are your doctor, if they are your lawyer, if they are your business partner, that piety compels them to treat you honorably.
Yeah.
It is, in fact, the opposite case. Their piety compels them to loathe you, to have a visceral gut hatred of you, to wish you dead, to harm you in every way possible, to undermine everything you do, to give you the worst possible advice, to usurp your religions, to usurp your governments, to take away all of your freedoms, to destroy your traditions, your culture, to promote miscegenation amongst you so that you lose your guardian angels, so that you lose your DNA, and to in every way ensure that you will fail and that you cannot succeed and survive. And that is what piety represents to these people. And I really want to wake people up to that fact. Don't think that these people think as you think. It is the exact opposite. Don't project your conception of morality onto them, because what they conceive of as being moral is your complete annihilation and nullification into primordial chaos. In other words, dissolving you into nothingness so that it is as if you had never existed in the first place.
Absolutely. And obviously that's like on par with basically every modern day description of supremacy groups. It just seems to be given this pass or you know this like it's the inversion itself on its face allows it to continue to proliferate in society and be acted out by these people and you had said that essentially the extermination of the goyim or the Gentile and the establishment of the king here. I've noticed a lot that Trump and his supporters have sort of adopted the whole term golden age. Is that sort of what that's alluding to, or could you give some insights into where that term comes from and what it means for us?
The term Golden Age was a term utilized by the Romans for their god Saturn. Saturn is the Greek god Kronos. It is Moloch to the Jewish people. It is Shabbatai, meaning the planet Saturn. So they viewed the Saturn god, the god of time, the god of might, the planet Saturn, the most distant planet, and therefore the closest to the divine realm. When you're making that epistrophe, that return back up the great chain of being to God, you have to get to the planet Saturn. And from there, you have to leap over the abyss, the great divide, in order to enter the heavenly realm. And the great divide is the planets which whirl around the earth like the Ouroboros. So Saturn is very key, and it provides the gate through which you have to pass to return to God. So Judaism is the worship of Saturn. Shabbatai Tzevi, his first name, Shabbatai, is the name of the planet Saturn. So the Romans would have a festival called Saturnalia, to celebrate this golden age in which the golden age to the Greeks and Romans was the Garden of Eden. It was the time in which nature provided everything that man needed, and that men were loving towards one another and honest and were good and true and beautiful because they were the closest to Saturn. They were the closest to the divine realm and the divine light of Phanes, Protogenes, of Apollo, of Jove, had created a perfect world, and man was perfect and a part of that perfect world. And it was an age of great wealth and great abundance, and people did not have to strive, and people did not harm or enslave one another. According to Homer, there were the ages of the Golden Age. The Silver Age became increasingly corrupt, and man became more vile towards man. Then there was the Bronze Age and the Age of Heroes, and ultimately technology would take over in what they called the Iron Age, which was to be the age of Pisces. And for them, it was the age that they were in, where man had become technological and lived in cities and was therefore exiled from the Golden Age. Like Adam and Eve were exiled from the Garden of Eden. That's where they adopted all of that mythology from. And there are similar things in Islam. Christianity adopted it, and there are similar things in the Hindu religion, that this Iron Age in which man gains the knowledge, the forbidden fruit, leads to brother at the throat of brother, killing off brother and destroying everything. So the conception is that he's returning it to this golden age of abundance. But in the Saturnalia festival, as I pointed out in one of my videos, there was a practice whereby they would give like clemency or leniency to their slaves, and the slave would become the master and rule over the master for a day. And it was a party, it was a festival, it was a time to lighten up, and relax and be human again, as it was in the Golden Age, when brother would not enslave brother and human beings were decent to one another. They would be decent to their slaves for one day, and not only that, hilariously to them, they would make the slaves the master and the masters the slaves. Now, when a Jew looks at that, he sees the Roman domination and slavery of the Jewish people in the Roman exile, which commenced in 70 AD and which is closely aligned with Christianity. So what Trump is cryptically saying to the Jewish people is that he has now entered the festival of Saturnalia, where the slave becomes the master and the master the slave. In other words, the Roman West, the Edomite, Amalekite Roman Empire of America, is to fall. And since the Romans dominated the Jews and destroyed Judea and expelled them from the Garden of Eden, it is now the Romans who are to suffer and to be the slaves. And though he misled people to believe it would be an age of abundance and wealth, it was an age of abundance and wealth for him and his fellow billionaires who are ripping people off on the stock market and the crypto markets with all kinds of rug pulls and inverse rug pulls. So they are getting wealthy, but he is setting about to impoverish America and bring down and destroy America, while at the same time bolstering Israel. Again, it's this process of stealing the Tiferes and Ois. The beauty and might, the good, the true, and the beautiful is being stolen from America. All of our rights are being stolen. Our wealth is being stolen. Our industry was transferred to China on purpose by this same group, because we are the shell, the husk, those shattered shards of the vessels that were destroyed when the emanation first occurred. In order to rectify the world, to cleanse away the shells so that the pearls, the divine sparks, can be freed to return to God, we have to be destroyed. And the thickest, toughest shell, the one that's most important to crack, the nut that is the hardest, but the most protective at the same time, is America. So America is Amalek. America is the Kelly Pa that protects Israel. and we self-sabotage and are drawn into the Red Sea for the behest and for the benefit of Israel, so that we are destroyed in their place. We are scapegoated for everything that they do. The whole world turns against us. And when we are destroyed and killed, and as we go down, we kill everyone else off, then that glowing light of Israel is released from its shell and takes over the whole world. So we are the vessel containing the spark of the soul. We are the body, the matter, the material world that represents this exiled world in which Jews live because they were kicked out. Initially, Adam and Eve were wholly light. And it was only when they were clothed, meaning when they were given flesh, that they were kicked out into the exile to live in the material world. So the Jews believe that the Gentiles are the material world, and Isaac Luria set up the mythology that in order to release the sparks of their souls so that they can become heavenly light, like Adam and Eve initially were before they were clothed in flesh, the Gentiles have to be exterminated and the physical world has to be destroyed. And then they can create the Garden of Eden again underground, in which these 600,000 immortal androgynous souls, which existed initially in Adam, can be reborn through King Messiah, who is the new Adam, just as Jesus was called the new Adam by Christians, and just as Noah was considered to be the new Adam, King Messiah is to be the new Adam.
See, yeah, and it does very, very, I mean, to the people that can see it, I think like me and you, it's very obvious what's happening with things like the tariffs and the anti-Semitism laws, and Trump posturing war with Iran to set up the World War III, sort of fulfilling this prophecy. And it's really concerning, I guess, to like put it in the lightest way possible. I think that the constant worship and praise and things that are going on, and people that don't understand that this has been a thousands year long process, and that these people are completely beholden to this belief system to propagate these things. Really quick, I did have just two questions that came through in the chat. If you don't mind answering those really quick. One is, how does Chabad specifically have so much influence over every U.S. president since at least Reagan? Do you think it's blackmail, or do you think the presidents themselves are Kabbalistic?
It goes back all the way to Kennedy. JFK was seen with the Rebbe,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a famous photograph that I brought out before Kennedy himself did, of Robert Kennedy Sr.
Mm-hmm.
With Chabad. And RFK Jr. is aligned with Chabad. And I dug it out that Teddy Kennedy was also a Chabadnik. It goes both ways. Chabad gains its power through having these leaders align with it, and these leaders gain power by aligning with Chabad. And then they get campaign financing, they get media support, they get political support. Yes, I do think there's a lot of blackmailing going on. Epstein is just the tip of the iceberg. It's been going on forever. Colonel Edward Mandel House, who was aligned with the bankers before World War I, and who was the right-hand man of President Woodrow Wilson,
Mm-hmm.
wrote a book called Philip Drew, Administrator, where he talked about the fact that they find someone who has a scandal in their past, and they utilize that as leverage against them to blackmail them. And then they put them in power. And President Wilson had letters from a lover he had, Mrs. Peck, which Untermeyer and Lewis Marshall purchased from her, that they utilized to blackmail President Wilson and Brandeis, get Brandeis appointed as the first Jewish Supreme Court justice, even though he was the most scandalous shyster in America, and there was strong opposition to him. They got in the Federal Reserve Act and the income tax so that they could fund World War I. Then they instigated World War I, and then they had Wilson bring in America on the side of the British in exchange for the Balfour Declaration. So that's the way it's worked, and it's worked that way with every American president. They find someone that they have leverage on. They also like the idea of Christian Zionists. They like the idea of socialist communists who pretend to be conservative, like Reagan was. The whole neoconservative movement came out of the University of Chicago and Lewis Strauss and Irving Kristol, and this idea that it's legitimate to lie to the public, what Plato called the noble lie, where you pick a constituency which you think can be the main vote or the swing vote, and you pander to it with lies. You tell them everything they want to hear. And then once you get elected, you do the exact opposite and renege on everything, all of the campaign promises. And they usually try to do it kind of vindictively. They pick the people they hate the most. They hate the most the Christians. So they infiltrated with Christian Zionism. They got to all the pastors. They gave them money. Many of the Christian evangelical pastors are pedophiles and have all kinds of sex scandals that they can be leveraged with. So they engaged in classical communist entryism into the evangelical Christian movement, which had been set up for it through Christian dispensationalism, the Scofield Bible. And going all the way back, as I was saying, the Protestant movement was always heavily Zionistic. Even the pre-Protestants in the 1400s instituted this idea of the restoration for the Jews and naming the Antichrist as anyone who stood in the way of that restoration of the Jews, be it the Pope or the Tsar. And so that move from infiltrating the Christian evangelicals to get hardcore Republicans elected to support Israel, that morphed into this Trumpist neoconservative movement, and they were always kind of intermixed and intermingled, pretending to be conservative, but always being communists and favoring the interests of the communist parties, favoring the interests of China, favoring the interests of Russia. Destroying NATO, bringing America into self-destructive wars in the Middle East, not so much to bring down the Muslim nations, but most importantly, to bring down America and its Western allies. And we were warned about all of this by Anatoly Golitsyn, who said that the whole fall of the Soviet Union was fake, that all the fake fights between Russia and China are fake to lure divisions, to create wedges, just as today we see Western Europeans driven towards communist China. And now Trump has aligned with Soviet Russia so that NATO is broken up. There's no nuclear umbrella over continental Europe so that Russia can attack Western Europe, and we see Chinese troops and North Korean troops. So we know that the international communists are all one body, but they fake it to draw and create wedges and create two sides. A good example of that is also the fact that you'll see many Democrats who sponsored the growth of China, like Al Gore, and but also Republicans like Nixon under Kissinger, who would create a divide where there would be one side favoring China, Red China. And then you had libertarians like Murray Rothbard favoring Soviet Russia as an apologist for Russia. And Ron Paul also is very apologetic to Russia and is all over Russian media. So they try to create all kinds of splits to get one side to align with Russia, one side to align with China. And then they get us fighting each other, and they supply the weapons with which we fight one another and destroy one another.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's the false dichotomies, seem to be so effective even today. Like when you try to lay it out to people and show, that the world's governments are in cahoots with each other and interoperating. I mean, you had things like COVID, the COVID pandemic, where, even though all of these countries are supposed to be fighting with each other, they're all, intermingling and cooperating and facilitating this agenda. And I know
And it
we're,
also eliminates all accountability.
yeah,
we never see any accountability for anything. They just perpetuate this fighting between the two groups. But all the people who gave bad advice, all the people who undermined things, all the people who broke the law, they're never held to account.
Yeah,
The fight just moves forward into perpetuating the fight, but it never results in justice. It never results in restitution. It never results in resolution. And that's by design, so that it is brother killing brother, which has always been their plan.
absolutely.
It's Cain killing Abel. That's
Yeah.
what the whole plan has been from the first family, according to them.
Absolutely. And I hate that we're so close to time. And I had this, so I had this shed that was supposed to be delivered Sunday and they delayed it to today. And it's supposed to be in about 5 minutes or so. So I do want to do eventually a part two with you on this, but I wanted to give you the floor for the last 5 minutes. So if there's anything super pressing that you absolutely need my audience to hear from you, and if you want to show them like where, or tell them where they can find more of your work, and I know you've got your website as well, where you sell all of your books and your research. So I'm going to give you the floor for the last five.
If you go to cjbbooks.com, my initials, CJB books with no spaces, hyphens, or dashes.com, you'll find my books. You can contribute to my work, and you'll also find my social media links at the bottom of the page. My message is we are at the precipice of absolute disaster. They have written a script, which is their plan book and their playbook. They are following that script to the letter. And the ending of that script is that they are going to destroy the human form and destroy the surface of the earth with 10 plagues, exactly as they did to Egypt with 10 plagues. That humanity is about to endure worse horrors than it ever has before, that they are vengeful and spiteful against all the rest of humanity, and they are arrogant and wish to inflict harm on all of us and terrible suffering, not only in their minds as retribution for the terrible harm and suffering that they have endured for 2,000 years, but also in order for them to obtain redemption for all of their sins against the God Yahweh. They have always made the Gentile world their scapegoat. They have a whole mythology about it, which I've explained in my books and in many video presentations and interviews, that on Yom Kippur, the Gentiles are offered up to scapegoats to Satan, who is their progenitor through Eve, through Cain, that all these souls are often offered up to suffer the punishment for all the sins of Israel, and that the more that they can make us suffer and the more harm they can do to us, the more their gods will feel satisfied that justice for their sins has been meted out, even though it has been meted out on the scapegoat. And that by scapegoating us, harming us, and exterminating us, they are going to create a new utopia without us. And that is what we are up against. And they have complete control over our leadership. Now, fate sometimes steps in and plays a role, and things do not always go as they plan, but they now have tremendous computer systems, quantum computing for gaming every potential scenario, and we are in extreme jeopardy. And I propose as a solution to get all the most brilliant and successful and talented and gifted people out of their hands so that they are no longer assisting in our demise, and to create a new society of like-minded people who want to preserve and save ourselves from them. We're going to need a military position that is defensible, in which we can serve as a counterpoise and as a force to stop this process of the extermination of humanity. And it has got to be done immediately. There's an extreme urgency for it. All of the military, the current militaries of the earth, are focused on our mutual destruction, and we need a military force that is concentrated on preserving itself. So if we can brain drain all those who are engineering our destruction, not all of them, but hopefully the best of them, and convert them to our cause of mutual preservation, then we can win. If not, it is looking very bad.
I absolutely agree. I think that was extremely well put. I always try to preach to people like we need to exit this system. We need to build an alternative. Network with people that are like-minded and want to see the human race flourish, and get together and strengthen each other through this networking and this collaboration together. So I'm on the same page with you. And Christopher, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know we barely scratched the surface today, and I'm hoping that I can set aside some more time with you in the very near future, for us to explore some of these things. I have tons of homework to do. You're a very well-educated man, and I want to thank you so much again for your time. And we'll definitely do a part two if you're up for it.
Certainly. And please send me a link if you're going to be posting a recording of this so I can share it with as many people as possible. And thank you so much for the wonderful interview and the time and opportunity you have afforded me.
You got it. Thank you so much again, and we will see you. We'll see you next time, and I will be dropping that link to you and sharing this out ASAP.
Thank you so much. And thank you to your audience for your kind viewership.
Absolutely. You have a good rest of your Tuesday, and I'll be reaching out to you soon, Chris.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.